FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
You're listening to Kerry Lutz on the Financial Survival Network, and lots going on. We've got Craig Hemke with us, a.k.a. Turd Ferguson of tfmetalsreport.com. And Craig, how are you today?
Kerry, doing just fine. Thank you. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, so, it's really heating up there, a war of propaganda. You don't know who to believe because in a war of pathological liars, whose word do you accept?
That's true. And there's definitely a track record on both sides, if you will, of disinformation and misinformation. It makes it impossible to believe either side. There might have been a time 20 years ago when you'd look at the U.S. story and something like this, or the Western story, and you'd think, and you'd believe it. You'd think, well, we're the ones that tell the truth and are on the side of honesty and all that. And you can't do that anymore. There's clearly, I think, a plausible case can be made for both sides. I mean, the separatists or rebels or whatever you want to call them in eastern Ukraine had seemingly gotten pretty proficient at shooting down aircraft in the last couple of weeks. So, why not think that they're just targeting another Ukrainian transport and then, oops, look what we shot down instead. Yeah, I can believe that. But at the same time, here the U.S. and the Western allies have been supporting this. I mean, it's not a nice guy government in Kiev, full of, I guess we'll call them neo-fascists, to use the hip term, and ultranationalists and anti-Semites, and that's the side that the U.S. has chosen to support. I mean, they're not good guys either. They're bombing the heck out of the poor people in Donetsk and every place else, and ruthlessly killing people there. And yet, the U.S. is silent on that because they're so fully supporting that government. Why would it surprise anyone if the Ukrainian government somehow had their hands in this as a way to inspire more Western and NATO support of their efforts? So I don't know whom to believe. All I know is it's a mess, and it sure has the scent of history upon it, doesn't it, Kerry? I mean, you go back 100 years ago to what started World War I, and here we are in the kind of the same part of the world, and many of the same events and alliances kind of pulling us that direction.
And arguably, there is a 100-year war cycle,
Yeah.
You go back to 1714, 1614. There's always these wars taking place every 100 years, a world war. And, it makes one think.
Yeah. And much of what was fought for, or was the casus belli, if you will, in World War I, this kind of German expansion, uniting the continent of Europe under German rule. Well, here we are 100 years later. That's essentially what's happened with the European Union. So, I mean, they may have different leaders and different sets of circumstances, but here we are back in the same spot. And that German Union is expanding to the east to some regard to loop in Ukraine with their wheat fields and their coal mines. Again, not much different from what one of the major goals of World War I was 100 years ago. So pretty interesting. They talk about history repeating and rhyming. Well, here we are again. Let's just hope we hope and pray that it's not the same disastrous results for mankind.
Yeah, because if it's one thing we learn from history, it's that we don't learn anything from history, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of people think that somehow we're all smarter now than we were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But all we are simply doing is standing on the shoulders of all those folks and all of the knowledge that they gained, and the technology and everything else has just ramped up over time. But individually and personally, we're no smarter than they were 6,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. Human beings are still human beings. That's why there's so much to be learned from studying history, because the same mistakes keep getting made over and over again. And again, I just hope and pray we're not headed down that path again.
But we do make better weapons than they made 100 years ago. Got to give us credit there, and better technology and all that.
People think that because we have a computer and an iPhone, that makes us smarter than where we were 100 or 200 years ago. No, we only have computers and iPhones from the accumulation of technology over the last 100 or 200 years. We're not, as a race of people, as a species, we are not that much smarter or brilliant or wise than we were as a species 100, 200 years ago. I mean, and that's why we're prone to make all the same mistakes. And that's why,
we're
again,
still
we have to
killing each other in multiple wars. There's a dozen wars taking place across the earth at any given time. And there always has been.
Right.
You know, that's what you have to realize. So if we were so much further evolved, I don't think that would be the case. Do you?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. And that kind of gets to the point of we're no smarter than the human beings were 100 years ago or 300 years ago or 500 years ago. And so we are apt to make the same mistakes. And gosh, if it doesn't seem like we're not headed down that same path.
Yeah, and you just have to look at all the hot spots of the world. And, you know, when I was at Freedom Fest, I had the honor of interviewing P.J. O'Rourke. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's probably the best war correspondent out there, although he doesn't go to many wars anymore. He's got little kids now. But, mm-hmm. you know, he went to every war for a while going on. And, you know, he wrote a book called Holidays from Hell, where he was a tourist literally at every war taking place then. And I think there were like 16 or 18 wars going on then. And, you know, he almost got killed a couple of times just on that holiday. And, you know, it's just amazing when you would read these things because everybody seemed to be right. You know, everybody seemed to be right, that they all knew, you know, their position was right and they were justified in trying to kill the other guys. And, you know, I think you're right. We really have not evolved that much both in our personal relationships with one another, the way we relate to each other, and in the way that countries relate to each other and try to wipe each other off the map, you know? Yeah.
And I think, you know, all the way down to an individual basis, you know, the people that are listening to us, I do think that if you agree with that, with what we're talking about, I think you can begin then to make some forecasts and assumptions about how you need to prepare for what is most likely coming, you know, whether it's geopolitical history repeating itself or economic history repeating itself. You know, you and I have talked countless times about the long list of paper currencies that have failed, that have gone the way of the dodo bird, you know, or the long list. Zero Hedge publishes it from time to time in a great chart of the last 5 or 6 world reserve currencies and how they have all expired and been replaced by something else over time. Again, if you agree with what we're talking about and understand that, you know, we're not any smarter and that history does repeat, then you can learn from these experiences and then you can make your own individual plans to try to prepare yourself and, you know, profit from and I don't want to say profit, that's not the right word, but at least protect yourself against events that may be coming down the road.
Yeah. Do something, you know, just don't be a sitting duck because that's what you are right now.
Absolutely.
Right? You're just a sitting duck. And the other thing you should learn from history is that regardless what the government is or was, they couldn't care less about the common folks, the common people of their country, no matter what their rhetoric, right?
Yeah, right. They're going to conscript you into their armies. You know, they're going to, absolutely. They're going to tax you. They're going to tax you by the way of inflation and currency devaluation. All of it done to preserve the power of the ruling class, the political elite, you know, the proletariat, whatever you want to call them. And again, you have to recognize that and do what you can to prepare for it. You know, I think it's part of the human condition to just assume that tomorrow is going to be like yesterday, you know, to just say, well, everything's fine. And it's not. And there's hardly anyone left alive that remembers a world where the U.S. was not a superpower and the provider of the reserve currency, because you got to go back to 1944, 45.
Yeah.
I mean, well, how many centenarians are running around, you know, giving speeches on what it was like before that? There's nobody left. And so everybody just assumes that that's the way it's always going to be. And it's not always going to be that way. We're rapidly approaching the end of that currency regime. And again, how do you prepare for that other than knowing that, you know, knowing your history and understanding that a change is coming So then you just have to, try to begin to prepare for how that change might affect your personal situation, your finances.
Yep. Ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. And in this case, it's a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen. Even the mainstream media is starting to get into it. There was an article in the UK Telegraph about, the passing of the US dollar as the reserve currency. And, the thing is, it's just that you can just see that I see it as worldwide chaos when it happens, for a period of time. I don't believe it's going to be a proactive solution here.
No, and it'll be sponsored. I mean, it pains me to say this because I'm an American and I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
And I like my country and I like its founding principles. So it pains me to say, though, that a lot of that chaos will be sponsored by the U.S.
I know.
By these powers within the U.S. that are desperately trying to cling to the power that comes from having the reserve currency. And so there will be wars. There will be sponsored wars and insurrections. There will be strife, all done to try to maintain the current structure. But again, when you're trying to, Kerry, a lot of folks are going to the beach this summer, and you build up that sand castle and you put the little moat around it, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then one wave comes in and gets close. And at that point, your sand castle is doomed, right? But you frantically sit there and try to pack new dry sand around the edges, and everything, try to firm it back up. That's what the U.S. powers, that's what the Western powers are doing now. I mean, the wave has come in. It came in, really came in 2008, but it's been coming in now for the last 10 or 12 years. They're desperately now trying to pack new, fresh sand around the outside of their castle, trying to reinforce it, but it's too late. The more waves are coming, and eventually it's going to take the whole thing down. Again, if a system is unsustainable, then it simply can't be sustained, and that's where we are.
Yep, and you're right. I like the analogy, and more on that when we come back on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio.
When your accountant wants tax-free income, this is what he does. Accountants know the law. They also know that any American could legally get paid up to 3 times per month, 100% tax-free. That's 36 tax-free checks each year. It doesn't matter what you make already. This simple strategy could work for anyone. Go to www.irsrevenge2.com to learn how. That's IRSrevenge2.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
We're back with Craig Hemke on the Financial Survival Network. You know him well as Turd Ferguson of tfmetals.com. So, that brings us to gold. And, we saw a number of attempted takedowns last week. Then the Malaysian airliner shot down, instantly goes up. Then it's capped because you can't have a panic taking place in gold, right?
Right. And it's very interesting what is taking place internally within the gold and silver markets, to the extent that we can believe the data that gets cranked out by the criminals at the CFTC and the COMEX and the CME. But if we take it at face value and believe it has merit and is honest reporting of the internal market dynamics, what has happened this year is telling in that, price was rated dramatically beginning really in April of 2013. But if you go back even further, it was back to the fall of 2012 when QE to infinity was started by the Ben Bernanke.
The evil banks, Ben Bernanke.
Yeah. When that happened, all of the banks were caught flat-footed and heavily short gold and paper gold and silver, huge obligations. And so there was no way that the price was going to be allowed to rally from there because it was going to really, really squeeze these banks and probably put a lot of them out of business. Instead, price was rated and smashed, broke down through some important technical levels, particularly in April of 2013. And that whole time, while price fell from 1,800 to 1,200, the banks were covering positions and essentially squaring off their books. They could have, at that point, stood back and now let price just rise organically. But they have instead chosen to fight tooth and nail this year, adding, just in the last 6 weeks alone, while price was trying to rally and start a new uptrend, the banks have added 100,000 new positions, short positions. That's something like almost 500 metric tons or something like that in paper metal. Why are they working so hard to cap price? Well, I would maintain that it's because the gold is gone. The Western gold, whether it's stored in New York or in London, has all been shipped now to China and points east. There is no, or really hardly any physical metal left. The banks know that if Western investment demand, we got all this Eastern demand, whether it's China, India, wherever, we know what they've done to the vaults. Well, now if Western demand returns, big hedge funds and pension funds and individuals and everybody else start stacking gold because it's so clear that the end is near. Well, there's no gold to supply. These banks are out of gold. They don't have it to supply. And so they're doing everything they can at this point to suppress and cap price in what it will eventually be a vain attempt to suppress investment demand. I mean, you can see it. It's almost, you get the feeling watching gold these days. It's almost like a pressing on a spring or to go back to that summertime, the summertime analogies, it's like holding down a beach ball. I think we're very close to a breakout. I've said all year that I thought gold was at least going to have a 25 to 30% return this year, move up back towards 1,500. Got some work to do in the last 5.5 months of the year, but I don't have any doubt in my mind that may even be an understatement by the time we get into the latter part of this fall. It is a protection against the dollar debasement. It is your only protection against currency devaluation and collapse. And the more people that realize that, the better, because sound money is where we're headed back to. And you need to take that advice, I guess, and institute a sound money policy on your own if you're listening, to get your own stack of physical gold and silver, put it someplace safe, and then just wait for all these events to begin to unfold.
Yeah, be your own central banker, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, it's just insane what's going on with the budget, with everything. I think the only thing that stopped the country from going bust was the energy boom, I mean, if we didn't have that, I think we would have collapsed a long time ago, years ago.
Yeah, and this gets back to the Malaysian aircraft story and the first Malaysian aircraft that disappeared. I personally can't believe now any official story that gets put out by the U.S. government or the Western governments, and then laid out by the sycophant press, because everything that's been done for the last 5 or 6 years is fake. They changed the accounting rules so that the banks would appear to be solvent. So then they start printing all this money and feeding it to the banks, and the Fed is buying all this lousy, worthless paper off the banks' balance sheets and replacing it with treasuries to make them look solvent, make them look like they have cash flow and earnings and all this crap. And it's all garbage. All the economic statistics are all manipulated garbage. The unemployment rate is a joke. The GDP in the first quarter, they even reported the GDP, the economy shrank by 3%. And we're supposed to think that that's okay and fine, and a temporary blip caused by some cold weather. So I think that they've somehow managed just simply to hold it all together with lies and misinformation for the last 6 years. And that's that's your sandcastle that is just getting slowly eroded away by the incoming tide of truth. And math is math. They don't call it the laws of they're not just simply suggestions of supply and demand and suggestions of economics. There's a lot of laws there.
It is to these guys, to these politicians. They're, it's advice. It's not true. Laws to these guys.
That's true. But, there was a great line in the movie JFK, where they say, theoretically, an elephant can hang by its tail, attached to a daisy off of a cliff.
Yeah.
But you look around, that's not true. And that's kind of where we are now. Everything that you're being told about the recovery and how all is well and great, and just look around, it's not true. They're just trying to paper things over as long as they can. And again, the smartest thing that people can be doing, at least from a financial standpoint right now, is holding physical gold and physical silver. It is your one true protection against this madness.
And madness it is. It really is. Economic self-immolation that that the United States and the West is going through now, Craig. I mean, it really is.
Right. And again, like we said, if it's unsustainable, it can't be sustained. And we've reached that end game at TF Metals report. We call it the end of the great Keynesian experiment. Where Keynes and his ilk all just said, the government just keeps growing and growing, and you just keep printing more and more money and everything. But at the end, eventually, it grows so fast and exponentially that it eventually is just out of control. And that's where we are. No measure of politics or politicians who want to say we need to get back to a balanced budget and all that. That's all nonsense. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. The system just needs a reset, a devaluation and a revaluation and all that kind of stuff. And getting from point A to point B is going to be the hard part, because it's going to be disorderly. There's going to be continued wars and
civil unrest.
Yeah, we'll be hopeful. I mean, the best thing that can happen, like I said, is it'll just be orderly. It all makes sense over the next however many years that this plays out. I just fear that there's going to be pretty nasty between point A and point B, and it's every man for himself, and you just got to prepare, plan, and take care of you and your family, and then hopefully we'll all see each other on the other side.
Yeah, well, one way or the other. It could be better than you think, too. You just don't know the way it's going to happen. You really don't.
That would be wonderful. I hope it's better than you think. I hope it's orderly and an orderly transition to some new system, where the dollar is part of a reserve a basket of something,
Look, some people have said it'll be like going back to the 50s. The 50s were like, really, I mean, I was born in the late 50s, but when you read what the 50s were about, 50s were really, in a lot of ways, the golden era of the United States post World War II. Forget about post Civil War, which really was the golden era when we were on the gold standard. But, in a lot of ways, the 50s were really the best of what the country had to offer. And, no one said it's going to be easy going back, but that was before consumerism took over, Craig, and before the family broke up, and a lot of those bad things, those bad trends happened at the end of the 50s,
Yeah, I would say, at least in my opinion, I think in those two periods that you describe, I think what lies ahead could potentially be more like that late 19th century kind of American freedom, ability to go out and be a rugged individual and grow and your dreams and everything else. I don't know if we can go back to the 50s, just because I don't see a role in the world for America like we had in the 50s, where we were the only real big industrial power, because everybody was rebuilding from World War II, and we had reserve currency status and all that stuff. And I don't think that's geopolitically the direction that we're going. I don't think that's even possible from where we are now. But once all this reset and we take our medicine and deal with everything and kind of work it all through the system over the next however many period of years, then potentially the American system is set up to allow for kind of a rebirth.
Yeah,
that would be wonderful. But boy,
well, we have a lot of distance between here and there.
Yeah,
and a lot of educating, because the average person is not going to really understand exactly what happened. Once that petrodollar is gone, it's gone, and nobody's going to get it, right? Yeah,
and I think that a fear, because of that education, like you said, and because of the narcissism and that kind of permeates American society and really Western society, I fear more, if there's going to be some kind of evolution to a new system, I fear something more along the French Revolution type of a scenario rather than a second American Revolution, and then who knows what comes out the other side. But Kerry.
Well, we're going to find out, right?
Yeah, you and I can do the best we can to kind of keep shining the light of truth on things. That's for sure.
Well, let's do it then. On that note, just tell us where we find your work, how we sign up and subscribe.
Yeah, thank you. TF for Turd Ferguson, tfmetalsreport.com is the site. And it's a bunch of like-minded folks. If you're listening to Kerry and I talk and you think that, yeah, those guys, they seem like they get it. TF Metals Report is populated with other folks that get it. And I encourage you to come by and check it out. And we try to make it a little bit different where we're all in the same boat trying to help each other. There is a subscription component where we have podcasts and webinars and daily metals analysis, but it's only $10 a month. So it's not a deal breaker. And I encourage folks to check that out as well.
And I absolutely do, because when there's a raid, when the metals get shaken out, I always go there, see what Craig's analysis is, and use that to kind of go about my way. And just check out financialsurvivalnetwork.com. You'll see the link to TF Metals there, and I encourage you to subscribe. And Craig, we'll talk with you again soon.
Kerry, it's always fun. I appreciate the time.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.